matters.
But you won't be able to see.
We can hear you, Tony. Thank you.
Oh, I see. That's how it works. All right, fair enough. So you ready for me to comment?
Sure. Yep.
Hold on a second. Sorry. So good morning, commissioners. My name is Tony Jones. As you know, I'm with Rubicon Development Services, and here are my comments for today. I request the Urban Forestry Commission to list a heritage tree on the Burton's property. It's too close to the foundation of the house. There's evidence that the tree has the ability to and has possibly damaged the foundation. The review of the tree's impact on the sidewalk and steps are evidence that it may harm the foundation. The elm leaf beetle is a persistent nuisance. The sight of the beetle in the home devalues the property. Residents are stressed and do not want to live in the property. This severely reduces the revenue from the property. The Burtons have to pay for the mortgage payments from their retirement and saving. The Burtons are at risk of losing the property due to the above items. The mitigation costs include pest removal, tree and root pruning, and foundation and sidewalk repairs without any revenue to offset or minimal revenue to offset the cost. This case shows how a city policy can have a disproportionate negative impact on African-American households. African-American households have less wealth than our Caucasian counterparts. $13,000 a year, or $13,000 total for African-Americans, and our white counterparts, $120,000. So there's a significant less wealth gap between those ethnic groups. The city is pledging Equity Goal 3 to eliminate racial inequity in all areas of government, including economic success. Delisting the heritage tree would be a step to reverse the racial inequity. Thank you.
Okay, do you see
See Mr. Wells?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can bring him in as well. All right, Mr. Wells, we brought you into the meeting if you'd like to provide a comment as well.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much for receiving me. My family, long-term, lived in the city for nearly 60 years. I grew up on Mississippi Street. My father pastored one of the earlier churches on that area, 3951 North Mississippi. So I'm very familiar with that area. There is a major concern that's already been mentioned, the virtual scale of the tree, and I don't want to repeat all of this, but the virtual scale of the tree makes the property in a position where the owners are not able to take advantage of it. And so there are some historical sensitivities to that area, Mississippi, Vancouver, Williams, Martin Luther King, and the displacement of businesses and people of color. I'm sure you've heard some of that. And this is a continuation of that, in that the tree has more regard than the people that own the property. And so I would urge real thoughtful consideration of the plight that it has put the owners in. And as a pastor who pastors here, 58-year-old church here in the city of Portland, second generation pastor, the voice of our membership and those in our community really do stand behind the Burtons as they seek to get a remedy of this challenge with this tree. And so I come in support of the tree be removed and they be allowed to exercise whatever they need to do to bring value to the property and re-inhabit the property.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. Do we have anyone else waiting, Brian?
The first one to provide comment as well.
We'll provide comment.
Sure. Okay.
Okay. Good morning. I hope I'm not sound.
Yes, we are at the end of the 5-minute period, so please make it brief.
Yes, I will. Good morning. I'll make this as brief as possible. We purchased the property 22 years ago as an investment property with the intent to leave to our heirs. The tree was not on title. Being a governmental entity, the city should have had an official duty to record the encumbrance. The problems with the tree is not related to development. It is the out of control beetle infestation in the home which prevents us from fully renting, causing us to pay double mortgage, rehab, and other expenses from our retirement account. The forestry inspector estimates it will take several years to interrupt the life cycle of the beetles. The arborist cited that they're using our house as a greenhouse. Pest control company cited it's a losing battle unless the tree is removed. The tree is in our front yard, 7 feet from our porch, 8 feet from the foundation. If it were not a heritage tree, it could be removed. The roots have cracked the newly repaired concrete work, stairs, retaining walls, the foundation, causing leaks in the basement and penetrating the sewer line. It's an estimate of about 38,000 plus just for the foundation work. The forestry department and commissioners had no consideration of African-American people and low-income people when they created their policies. A no vote is essentially saying we, the forestry commissioners, understand that the tree has created an enormous financial hardship. However, we feel the tree is more important than your family, and if that means you lose your property to a rich developer, so be it. But we will keep our tree and protect our program. I urge you to please dislist this property tree so we can keep our property. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Burton.
We have one more.
Okay, any other public comments that we have?
Yeah, we have
Okay.
one more. Brenna Bell signed up, and I'm gonna bring Brenna in right now.
Hi, Urban Forestry Commission. I guess my first comment was maybe you need a slightly longer for public comments. I know that trees are a big issue, and I'm the 350 PDX Forest Climate Coordinator and also the co-facilitator of the Shade Equity Coalition. So I've been talking to a lot of community-based organizations and activists who are excited about the intersection of urban forests and climate change. And I will be very brief. But my main question is about the opportunities for more collaboration between community-based organizations and urban forestry, especially in two particular areas. One is federal funding. The IRA is putting out a lot of money towards urban forestries, as you know, and I've attended some of the federal workshops, and all of them emphasize that competitive grants will be collaborations between city agencies and community-based organizations. And I've talked to most all the people in the Shade Equity Coalition who represent those community-based forestry organizations, and to the best of our knowledge, this is not happening collaboratively. So that's my first question, is it? And if not yet, how can we work together with the city to secure money for the community? And then my second question is based on that wonderful front cover story of the Oregonian on Monday, talking about cities around the country coming together, recognizing that urban forests are a nature-based climate solution. And it talks, and Portland is one of the cities listed, but it talks about examples from Austin and Chicago and Cleveland of these vibrant coalitions of agency partners and community-based partners. Portland is totally absent from that. It's absent from the article, and that's just not happening. So that's my second question is, what's going on with this really interesting Climate Solutions Accelerator program? Who beyond urban forestry is involved in it, if you know, and how could we get involved and create a more public-private coalition to move forward a common goal? And I could say more, but I know you've got a strong agenda. So those are my questions. I'd love to follow up with any of you either on the commission or in urban forestry on those questions.
Right.
Those sound like really excellent topics to address and really big ones. Brian, how do you suggest we go about?
Yeah, we don't have time to
good.
Sorry, we don't have time to respond to question in the public comment period. We need to move on the agenda. Talking about the Inflation Reduction Act funding opportunities is planned for the City Foresters report. That notice of funding opportunity was just released last week, so guidance was just issued So discussions are just starting now on that. And then we can provide information on the Vanguard Cities Initiative, which Portland is one of the original partners of. We're happy to provide information on that as well, probably over email, so we can get the meeting going.
Co-Chair Adrian,
Excellent.
I would look to one more.
Yes, go ahead. Sure.
Yes, one more other idea. I think that this has been of interest to others, and perhaps we could reconnect with Brenna and others who are interested to attend a policy committee meeting where we could dive into this collaboration option a little more deeply. Those are open to the public. They are publicly noticed, and we have more time, and we can delve in. We have a sort of a subgroup of the commissioners there as well. So I'm happy to do that.
Nice. Okay, very good. Thanks everyone for your comments. So we're going to move on to meeting minutes. And I understand we've got February and March. Is that right, Brian?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Two sets of minutes to review and approve.
Okay. And do you guys want to do them separately or together? Well, let's take them one at a time. That'll be clearer. Does anyone have any revisions for February? Okay, does anyone want to make a motion to approve? Okay, Bruce, anyone second? Second approval minutes for February? Okay, thank you. So all in favor? Okay, any noes? Any abstentions? Okay, great, thank you. Let's move on to March. Did you want to say something? Oh, okay. Is there something else on February or can we move to March? Okay, let's move to March. Roberta, you have your hand up. Is that?
Yeah. Thanks. I believe that was the minutes where we were approved the urban forestry statements regarding the budget and the Commissioner Ryan's letter. And in the discussion of the budget, I just like it captured in the record. I did mention that the policy committee was frustrated with the kind of the lack of detailed information about the urban forest budget proposal and how it related to the urban forest budget before being asked to endorse it, and that we wanted to express to the staff that we'd like to work with them on determining the appropriate level of detail to get more information on the budget in the future. And staff seemed in agreement with that, and I think that would be great to capture in the record.
Bruce?
I had two questions. Darrell's last name, it's spelled Bechthold. When I look online, it's spelled Bechthold. I don't know how it's spelled, but I'm hoping we get it right. And so both in the commission members present and the foresters report, it's spelled Bechthold. So I don't know what the correct spelling is, but I hope we get it correct. In the HB 3515 on page 2, the fourth item, part A, I think Sarah said that, let's see, it's written, she noted that if Portland's population dropped below 600,000, there would, I think what she said is since Portland's population is above 600,000, when this bill will hopefully be approved, it won't make any difference if the population drops below 600,000 at some point in the future. So I think the statement there is not accurate. I think those are the only two suggestions I had on changes to the minutes.
Okay. Any motion to approve March minutes? Thank you, Megan.
Yeah, well, and I just want to say I'll motion to approve them with
Revisions,
corrections.
thanks.
Yeah.
And any second? Great. Okay, all in favor? Any objections? Or no votes? Okay, any abstentions? Great. All right, moving on. Jen, we have you down for the forestry report.
Great, thank you, Adrian. Again, good morning, commissioners and visitors. Time provided, I have 6 items for you this morning. First, I'd like to invite you all to a spring tree walk and the dedication of a new heritage tree and the celebration of 30 years of Portland's Heritage Tree Program. That's on April 29th at Knott Park in the Park Rose Heights neighborhood. That park is at Northeast Knott Street and 117th Avenue. The dedication will be of a stately Turkish hazelnut in Knott Park that was recently designated by City Council as a heritage tree number 389. And it will include installation of a heritage tree plaque, presentation of the 2023 State Oregon Heritage Tree Hero Award to longtime urban forestry volunteer, former urban forestry commissioner, and heritage tree committee member Greg Everhart. Tree walk is from 10 to 11:30 and the ceremony is 11:30 to 12. And that information is also on our website. Moving on to the second item. Today's agenda includes an update on Streets 2035, which is also being called Streets PDX these days. That's a project led by the Portland Bureau of Transportation with the assistance of other city bureaus with roles in rights of way. For example, urban forestry regarding street tree assets and street tree space, Portland Water Bureau for potable water infrastructure, and Bureau of Environmental Services for storm and wastewater assets. And that project is a street design project working to clarify and establish guidelines for allocating the limited space in all of our public streets, public rights of way. Portland's forest is comprised of 2.9 million private property trees, 1.2 million park trees, and 218,000 street trees. So street trees are a relatively small component of the overall forest, but they're essential as right-of-way infrastructure. Street trees, particularly large form trees, reduce summer temperatures where they are generally the highest in cities, at paved roads, adjacent buildings, along sidewalks, and similar hardscaped areas common in streets. They take up rain, precipitation, and stormwater, keeping it on site and out of the stormwater system, which reduce those costs and needs, and the influx of pollutants into streams and rivers. Street trees lower car travel speeds, make a physical and visible buffer between vehicle and pedestrian traffic and homes, and create more walkable, connected, and beautiful communities. And they contribute to wildlife habitat and can be a key and sometimes the closest nature in the city for people living and working next to them. Because of hardscape and traffic, poor soils, jockeying for space with other infrastructure like parking, bus stops, light poles, utilities, sidewalks, etc., the right-of-way is one of the most difficult places to be a tree. So how right-of-way is designed, protecting and caring for trees already there when changes are made to streets, and making viable space for street trees, especially larger form street trees, to thrive is critical to street design. Our standard is a street tree every 25 feet of right-of-way in Portland. However, if you just look around, that's not the reality. And this project could be a significant part of changing that. You all have heard about this project several times in the past. Today, we're going to hear more towards the end of the project from Matt Burko. And I wanted to also identify that the streets team for urban forestry has included me, Casey Jogerst, Rick Faber, and it's now led by Belinda Udelman. Thank you, Belinda. More on that in a little bit. Third item, work to update our forest management plan is making progress. The Urban Forest Plan or Urban Forest Management Plan is the vision for Portland's forest. The current version is nearly 20 years old and therefore quite outdated. Updating the forest management plan has been an agenda item on the commission, for the commission, and discussed previously, including giving input on the broad initial scope of work for the project. And this will continue to be a Forestry Commission activity and agenda item. You may recall updating the plan as part 2 of a 3-part forest policy improvement sequence. Part 1 was technical and clarifying amendments to the tree code, city's tree regulations, and that was completed in 2022 with nearly 50 improvements made. Updating the forest management plan is part 2 and planned to be completed in 2024. That will inform and be followed by part 3, more comprehensive tree code amendments. The forest management plan request for proposals was recently distributed. This is the request for potential contractors to submit proposals for working with us to update the plan, working as consultants. RFP responses or proposals are due by April 28th. 2 information sessions for prospective proposers were held and were well attended. Urban Forestry Commissioner J.R. Lilly will be on the proposal review panel. Thank you for making that time, J.R. Very appreciated. Once the consultants have been selected and contracts finalized, early work will include finalizing the scope of work and developing the work plan for the project. 4th item, I reported on the Federal Inflation Reduction Act for Community and Urban Forestry in the past, and here's an update on that. Portland submitted a list of potential funding proposals that included funding for a pilot street tree maintenance program and for other types of community tree maintenance and planting partnership programs totaling $46 million. The application to the federal government was put together and submitted by the Oregon Department of Forestry. We received notification just last week that Oregon received just under $4 million in total funding. We have not yet received information on how the state will distribute those funds. It's a lot less than anyone anticipated. The USDA issued a notice of funding opportunity last week with significantly more funding available. Applications will be accepted for projects ranging from $100,000 to $50 million and must be completed within 5 years. Unlike the first round, local governments can apply directly to the USDA, and the city plans to pursue this with others in partnership. How are we doing on time, Brian?
Got 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good. 5th one, almost there. As discussed in previous commission meetings, the large tree stopgap amendment, as we've called it, which is Title 11, Section 11.50.040C1, expires in 2024. And we've reached out to the Bureau of Development Services to ask them to work on this with us in urban forestry. This is the Bureau of Development Services part of Title 11 to lead because it involves trees and private property development. However, due to staffing constraints, Bureau of Development Services has asked Urban Forestry to lead that section, so we will be doing that. You have heard about this in previous city forestry reports from me. I just wanted to give you an update on it. The current discussion with Bureau of Development Services includes whether to remove the expiration date from the code provision or to establish a new expiration date of late 2027. For those of you who aren't memorizing sections of code, which I hope no one actually tries to do, the upshot is that the sunset of the current code provision would mean significantly less incentive to retain large trees, those greater than 20 inches diameter breast height, in private property development, and significantly less mitigation payment for large trees removed in private property development. Reminder, in private property development situations, no trees are required to be retained except for designated heritage trees. Currently, there are 325 of these in the city. And last but not least, to celebrate Women's History Month in March, Urban Forestry's Marissa Richardson profiled 3 women of urban forestry: Julie Fukuda, Natasha Lipai, and Mari Aviles. I'll put the link to that story in the chat for you all. Thank you to Marissa, Julie, Natasha, and Marisol. As always, please send along to me any requests or ideas you have for future city forestry reports. Thank you. Any questions? Bruce.
I'm sorry, I didn't get it. What was the date of the expiration on the current large tree stopgap measure?
Yeah, it is December 31st, 2024.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
Megan, I think your hand was up next.
Yeah, my question is also about related to what Bruce's was. I'm assuming, but I don't want to be assumptive inaccurately, that we're going to talk about that at an upcoming meeting so we can work on that issue. Is that an accurate assumption?
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
Megan, right now, we're trying to identify the staff who will need to work on this. It's a big project. So once we have that and can figure out what the work is, you all will certainly be a part of it.
Awesome. I thought so. Thanks, Jen.
Casey?
Awesome, thank you. Jen, on number 5 on that, you said urban forestry is going to be taking over that project scope of looking at large trees on private property and development, not BDS?
Good question, because let me clarify that. We are just taking the lead on addressing that particular code amendment. So there's always, whenever there's an amendment proposed for code, city staff have to spend quite a bit of time working on it. And the first thing we do is put a team together. Normally, the parts of Title 11 that are BDS's to lead, it would be their staff leading the amendment project, in this case, large tree stopgap. They do not have those staff because it's an important amendment and they asked us to, we'll be leading it instead. That's all. So BDS staff will continue to be the ones implementing that section of code.
Gotcha.
Thank you. Yep.
Okay, we're ready to move on now. If there are no further questions.
There's a question in the chat, Adrian.
It's like Ivory's hand is up.
Oh, and Ivory. Hi,
Yeah.
Ivy. Yes.
Ivory, they're in the minutes of every meeting.
Thank you so much.
And there's a question in the chat. Let's see. Maybe I've asked this before. Oh, okay. That's a duplicate. All right, thank you. All right, we'll move on then to our presentation, and it's the 2035 briefing from Matt Burko. PBOT, welcome.
Thank you so much. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. All right, well, thanks for having me. I am Matt Burko. I am a project manager at PBOT. I'm currently on our Complete Streets team in our planning section, although up until recently, for the past 4.5 years, I was on a group at PBOT called Development Permitting and Transit, which is a group that, amongst other things, reviews private development applications. Throughout much of my last few years, I've been working on a project called Streets 2035, which actually bridges these two worlded aims to bring better decision-making in evaluating trade-offs between competing policies in both the development context and with city-led projects. So I've been here a couple of times before. I think I was here really early at the onset of the project, where the commission sort of shared some of their hopes and concerns related to trees in the city. I came back and did an update, and today I'm here to share some of the online tools. This project has always been envisioned to develop sort of an interactive set of online tools, and I want to share them with you today. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to do a very brief PowerPoint presentation, and then I'll switch over to the online website, and I'll use that as a sort of a framework for taking questions. So let me just do a quick screen share. And then I'm just going to adjust this view so I can see more of your faces. Assume you all have a visual on my screen?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Okay, so why Streets 2035? You know, our streets and our right-of-ways are complex. We have a variety of policy priorities and uses that at times can compete for limited space. This image, the infrastructure, is color-coded by the city bureau that manages it. We have a variety of bureaus that manage infrastructure in the right-of-way. So obviously for transportation, it's multiple modes of transportation, buses and pedestrians, bicycles, freight, goods delivery. Urban Forestry obviously manages street trees and city trees. BES manages our stormwater system. We have public and private utilities below the ground. So all of these elements on this image and those that aren't on the image, they all imply some level of space, right? We have space requirements for planting trees of different sizes. We have desired dimensions of our bike lanes, of our travel lanes for transit. All the utilities have desired clearances from each other. So in both a city-led project, when we are reconsidering how space is allocated on a roadway, or in a development context, sometimes the space is limited such that we can't meet, all policies at their desired dimensions. And this project was aiming to bring better decision-making to those situations. And so how we got here, early in the project, we analyzed our existing conditions in the right-of-way. We looked at how wide are our rights-of-way, how wide are our sidewalks, how do conditions vary in different parts of the city, both in terms of things like tree canopy. Our soils drain differently in different parts of the city. So BES has different strategies for managing stormwater in different areas. We documented the spatial needs within the right-of-way. So for example, all the infrastructure on the previous slide, there are existing guidelines and rules that describe the amount of space each of those aspire to. And so we're just bringing all that information together. And then we identified the top issues encountered in the right-of-way. So we had a multi-bureau technical advisory committee comprised of the different sort of owners of the infrastructure that is operating the right-of-way. So Urban Forestry, our pedestrian coordinator, Water Bureau, BES, et cetera. And we kind of asked the question when Urban Forestry is carrying out its mission around protecting and growing the urban forest, who do you bump into, right? When we are providing pedestrian crossing enhancements, who do you bump into? Maybe sometimes there's an underground utility or something like that. So we kind of tried to identify some of those issues. And then we evaluated street types as a context-based decision-making framework. I'm going to show this in the next slide out in our transportation system plan. Actually, let me just go to that slide and make it more clear. Actually, before I do that, I just wanted to do a quick summary of some of the things that I heard from this group over the course of my previous visits. I heard that, and I think this was Jen sharing that, we have a limited number of tree inspectors for a large amount of development. So greater clarity of decision-making is helpful. There's misperceptions of how tree roots behave and concerns about having to remove a tree later. The impacts of vaults on tree planting locations. People were citing examples, I think, of downtown developments that were redeveloping with limited or no street trees. This idea that, how do we, kind of sort of speak more as one city? It's not their infrastructure, it's our infrastructure, that trees are infrastructure that impact stormwater, urban heat island effects, safety, et cetera. And sharing, that there are equity issues as related to tree density, the availability of lighting. I know this relates to Urban Forestry's, how they prioritize tree planting locations in high equity areas. So, this project for me was a lot of learning about all of the different bureaus and how they go about doing their work. And you'll see in this site, I got this information from a variety of bureaus. And one of the things that we tried to do on this website that we built is to bring all that information together so that it is available to ourselves as staff, but also to the public to better understand existing priorities and requirements. So the website, and again, I will flip over to the website in a moment, but just so along the top, there are the general, categories of the site, but there also are the same information is presented down below. I would be able to scroll down if I was on the site, but just each of these gives a little more of a thumbnail description of what you might find on the site. So the three things at a broad level I want to talk about today is a little bit about our street types, then talk about our page related to development improvements, and then a page dedicated to a framework for city-led transportation projects. And so let's first talk about the street types. So I think, as I was saying, in our transportation system plan, we have designations for, we have a bike classification, pedestrian classification, transit, freight, traffic, right? Every street has a classification indicating its relative priority on those individual networks, right? If a street's on our planned bike network, it is a city or major city bikeway, right? We have major transit streets. We have streets that don't carry transit, right? And the one classification that we have that really sort of speaks more broadly to the city is the street design classification. And it is really tied more to how the city's zoning organizes growth, right? So our city has the zoning directs growth to a set of corridors and centers. Our comprehensive plan calls them, the smaller corridors are called neighborhood corridors. The larger growth corridors are called civic corridors. And so this existing PBOT layer or classification, I should say, is aligned with those comprehensive plan designations. And so I'll give you an example. So again, our civic corridor and civic main streets, these are streets that are accommodating higher density development. You can sort of see that to the sides adjacent to the the larger scale of the buildings. They tend to be our widest streets like 122nd Avenue or 82nd Avenue or BH Highway. So they tend to be our widest streets. The density of destinations makes them important to serve by a variety of modes. They tend to be our major transit routes. You'll see bus priority treatments, protected bike lanes. All of our street type images have street trees very prominent. And so it's just kind of trying to give a visualization of what our different streets by policy are aspiring to achieve. Obviously, we have work to transform our streets to be this way. And adjacent to this project that I was leading, we updated our pedestrian design guide. I know that we worked closely with Urban Forestry on that project. So these street design classifications are the basis of the city's sidewalk standards. And so, for example, on a main street, which are places that those are our widest sidewalks are on our main streets where we anticipate larger volumes of people walking. There is a larger, what we call a frontage zone adjacent to the building for things like cafe seating or retail uses. And one of the things that we worked with our pedestrian design guide on was our older pedestrian design guide didn't really describe the sort of purpose of the different zones of our sidewalks. And so we worked with our pedestrian coordinator when they were updating the pedestrian design guide to be more explicit and describe, what functionally each sidewalk is for. And the reason I mentioned that is, there are times in a development situation when we are asked to consider an alternate to the standard sidewalk. Oftentimes it is for things due to just a constraint of the site. It's often just a sort of PBOT being asked to accept or allow something less than standard to remain. But sometimes we flex the sidewalk. Sometimes there's a street tree issue and we flex the sidewalk to preserve the tree. And so having better information in the PED design guide helps the city make better decisions. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about trees in that context in a moment. But with that, I'll show more about this in a moment. So for each of the street types, there is at the bottom of the page, there's a map showing you where those streets are. And it just talks about the design needs of transit, of freight, of greening needs, such as trees and green stormwater infrastructure. So again, it just tries to bring sort of a comprehensive view. I'll share that in a bit. Then we have a page dedicated to development improvements in the right-of-way. And so, what we tried to do here, as I was mentioning, is I had lots of conversations with Urban Forestry where I learned a lot about, where different things live in city code, about the different guiding documents, strategic guiding documents, about administrative rules that guide things like work around trees, tree removal procedures, et cetera. And, it occurred to me that this information it's not always easy for everyone to find this information, right? And we're trying to bring better information to decision-making. So we created this page that tries to present city requirements related to development, not from the perspective of different bureaus, but really thinking about the person who may be doing work on their house or building a single house or building an apartment. The things that they will need to think about and that they may have to comply with is, we have certain code requirements and triggers for when you have to reconstruct your sidewalk to meet current standards. We have tree preservation and tree planting requirements. Obviously, when we reconstruct the sidewalk, those tree planting requirements are coincide. If you have driveways or a loading zone, we have code and rules that guide the placement of that infrastructure. We have a stormwater management manual. So there are certain triggers for when you have to manage stormwater. And we have, all our developments are served by utilities. And as you all know, all of these things imply space. And so what we've done here is you can click on one of these boxes and it'll scroll you down on the website. And I'll show the tree one when we get to the website. And for each element, there is a very brief description of the requirements. So for example, as I described, sidewalk standards are defined in our pedestrian design guide, applied based on our street design classification. We link to those code triggers for when developments are required to reconstruct their sidewalks. And we try to keep this brief so that the page is legible. If you want to read more about sidewalk requirements, you click the link and you can access our pedestrian design guide and some of our administrative rules that guide that process. And then also, well, what if I need to request from the city a deviation? I have a reason that I would like the city to consider something less than the standard sidewalk on my site. We have a process for that. And so we link to that for all of those. And so I wanted to share a couple of things while I'm speaking about development, how some of the ways that we've responded to some of the comments from this group and from Urban Forestry, again, to this idea of really elevating and confirming trees as infrastructure. So you see trees prominently here along with the other infrastructure requirements and that apply. One thing that we identified as a potential gap is the tree inspectors have a form that they use when they're evaluating trees to understand, basically to assess whether it is a priority for preservation. And this was something that, the city, like other bureaus, don't necessarily understand urban forestry's expertise in this regard. An applicant who maybe is looking to redevelop a site that has street trees, they sometimes assume that those trees can come down. So we want to make transparent, it looks to things like, is this tree, is it in an appropriate growing space? Is it a nuisance species? Different things. So we have a form that our urban forestry is working to post, and we will link to it. And it's really about hoping to create, again, more clarity of information. And it includes also alternatives that can be explored in developing your site to preserve existing trees. The question of electrical utility vaults that were precluding tree planting sites. And so again, I think people on this commission and elsewhere were noticing redevelopments happening with fewer or no street trees. So that was an issue that we delved into. And what we learned there is that, we have requirements in our zoning code and in some of our design districts around active ground floor uses, right? So having interesting, storefronts, lobbies, things like that create kind of eyes on the streets and an interesting urban environment. And so at some point in the past, what could happen is some of the things you see on the screen, by the time if you have a driveway for parking, and you have a loading space, and then you have an electrical utility room at the edge of the building, and all of a sudden, suddenly this frontage is no longer very interesting. And so there was, at one point, the city started to allow electrical transformers, and the electrical transformer is basically the infrastructure that powers the building. It takes the electricity out of the grid, transforms it into a current that the building can use. It's only there because the building is there. And so in placing it under the right of way, you'll see a small lid, or maybe it's a large lid, but the vault itself that this transformer is sitting in can be the full width of the sidewalk, and it can be upwards of 40 feet long. So that's 40 feet where you can't plant a tree. And so what we realized is that we didn't really have good decision-making criteria around the location of those transformers. They were just essentially being allowed if they could fit, right, in support of a policy around active ground floor uses. So we engaged with the Bureau of Development Services, which regulates private property and manages our design commissions and our design guidelines. We met with PGE, we met with Pacific Power. And what we did is we came up with we revised our process for approving these and said, the expectation is that developments plan for power on site, and that they should contact their power provider early to look for locations on site. I think in the past, they had heard from the utilities that the edge of the building was the only place that these infrastructure could go. The utilities were more flexible this time and said there's other places we can have a smaller opening and push the infrastructure further into the building. They could be located in parking lots. And so what we really wanted to do is encourage them to explore locations And then if they can't find a location on site that allows them to meet the requirements around ground floor activation in the zoning code, right, they can still apply for an exception to place it in the right of way. But it is now much more of an exception than it was before. We met with our design commissions who acknowledged and realized that, a frontage that, has a little more active uses, but no street trees isn't necessarily a good urban design outcome. So they were supportive of creating a more better decision-making around those. So I think we will see many, many fewer electrical transformers in the right of way. So that's something that we were able to accomplish with this site. So let me keep going with this project, I should say. These pages that we created, we have a caveat on the pages for people who interact with our development process. This is not your only place to visit. We have a whole, you have to permit all the infrastructure that you are ultimately constructing, and there's a great public works permitting page. There is a pages, there's technical resources around the specific materials you use for curbs and sidewalks, et cetera. There's a BDS manages our development review permitting process. So we linked all of those as well, but we're trying to really assemble information together. And I do want to show you the links to the tree related items in a moment when I switch to the website. And now I'm going to talk just briefly about city projects. This is the last piece. So again, this project was about development, context, and city-led transportation projects. And so again, when PBOT is engaging in a road project, right, we're often looking to address safety, give transit, better to get transit unstuck from traffic, speed and reliability improvements, basically trying to bring our streets in line with their policies as sort of dictated in our comprehensive and transportation system plan. So this framework for city projects is designed to help staff and the public find the information they need to support the evaluation of trade-offs, because there's always trade-offs, right? Just like in the development context, when there's limited space, there's trade-offs. In the road project, like there's rarely a section, we have fixed space on our roads, we're a growing city, we have growing demands, and there's always trade-offs. So it's really a three-step process. I'll step through each one in a moment, but we have a mapping interface similar to what you might find if you've ever seen our online transportation system plan map. You click on the street and all of its transportation designations, the bike and transit and freight designations will just appear automatically. We identified that for our higher order the streets where most of the growth and change is being organized, that there is a set of 8 curb to curb widths that repeat throughout the city, from our narrowest kind of main streets, which tend to be 36 feet wide, kind of the size of 2 travel lanes with parking on both sides, to our largest streets like 122nd Avenue, which is one of the widest streets in the city. So you can automatically see this, preliminary policy scan, and then we develop typical cross sections for potential ways that streets of that width could be laid out. And each of the sections has a red, yellow, or green assessment for a variety of factors, including safety, pedestrian, greening, bikes, transit, freight, et cetera. And when you see a yellow and a red, it means that there is a spatial trade-off that may need to be considered. I'll give an example. If a cross section includes a bike space for a bike lane that meets our bike design guides, it's our ideal amount of space, it'll show up as green. If it has maybe a 5-foot bike lane, which on many of our busier streets is not comfortable for most people riding a bike, it'll show up as yellow. The use is accommodated, but there is a trade-off. And the question is that trade-off acceptable? And if there's no bike lane, it'll show up as red. So it's a way for us to quickly understand the differences between the options. And then, when the city's doing a road project, this is what we do. We do a policy scan, we develop alternatives, and we try to do some analysis to evaluate those alternatives so that we bring them to the public, that we are having an educated conversation, and we refine them based on that. We may then, and then we have a handbook that guides the evaluation of trade-offs. Again, this is things that we do, but we wanted to, just like in the development context, we wanted to bring information together to ensure that, again, these decisions are complex, and we want to make sure that people have a resource for working through them in a consistent manner. So I'll just give a couple of these quick I made these little explainer videos. They're very short. So this is, if you select on the mapping drop-down menu, you come to this map of the city, very similar to our online transportation system plan map. And basically, as I was saying, you can zoom in on a particular street, any street, and you select on it, and its classifications come up. This little blue button says view cross sections, and it takes you to cross sections for that particular road width. And I'm going to skip to the next slide. So when you're at the sections themselves, it just explains a little bit about how that works. So first of all, you're free to navigate to the other cross sections. Like I mentioned, there's 8 repeating widths in our city, so you can go and check out options for our largest streets, smallest streets. I mentioned that the red, yellow, and green is about spatial trade-offs, right? And so there's a little question mark beside each one that explains how those colors, what they mean. So that information is there. And then there's a shading component of this that relates to, for example, if a street is a major transit priority street, which is our highest transit designation, the transit row will be unshaded, right? But we also have things like a transit access street. That's a lower classified transit street. So if it was a lower classified street, it'll be shaded. If it's not on the transit network at all, it shows up as white because the scoring is just not relevant to the decision-making. So we have these little drop bar down menu where you can manually adjust them, but they actually happen automatically based on the classifications of the street that you clicked on. Sometimes, in this particular width, there's 5 choices, and maybe you realize that's kind of overwhelming. We know that these 2 options don't make sense. You have the ability to sort of move them out of the way so you can look at these 3 sections, see how they're different. And then again, the color coding it's a reminder to our project managers of the multiple things that you're considering. And again, you'll see here for each option, particularly for the transportation options or elements, there's a mobility question, right? How is transit operating through the corridor? Is it being delayed? And an access column. So for example, buses are seeking to reach a curb so that they can have an accessible bus stop for people with mobility challenges. So these, and this happens for freight, it happens for bicycles. And so these decisions are complex. And so we're trying to bring that together in sort of an at-a-glance way. And then we have to do the work to analyze and understand the differences of these sections relative to the conditions on the street. Maybe there's not a lot of traffic and transit isn't delayed and there's no problem, or maybe it is, and we have to do certain mitigations. So we have this handbook for each of those items on that previous slide. It includes, it basically guides the analysis of trade-offs. So we look at things like transit delay, passenger delay. So that's saying how many buses are, transit, TriMet, for example, counts how many passengers are on their buses. So we know how many people are being delayed. So it's not just how many buses are being delayed, but how many people. Talk about, like I said, access to the curbs at stops. And maybe, we find that we don't have space, maybe we can meet more of our policy future. Maybe we can accommodate the bike designation if rather than having a continuous transit lane, we can do so. Other ways to get transit unstuck. So things like we can give transit signal priority at select locations where the buses are delayed, or we can add turn lanes at intersections, things like that. So again, this is just an example from the transit perspective. We do have a page dedicated to trees and stormwater, and it kind of explains the differences between them because the considerations are not identical. And so again, it's just, this is point being that this matrix evaluation is supported by this handbook. So what I'd like to do now is we are aiming to make this website publicly available around the beginning of June, but I wanted to share outcomes with this group. And I wanted to switch over to the page and just show you a little bit about it. And then take some questions. So I'll just quickly, if we go to the, did I mention that we rebranded this Streets PDX? I just gave this presentation to a different group an hour ago. Did I mention that piece? No?
You didn't. I did a little bit, Matt, but
okay.
Worth repeating.
What's the L repeating? Yeah, I mean, people were confused by the name Streets 2035. They're saying, you're not going to do this for another 12 years? And the name Streets 2035 was really making reference to the horizon year of our comprehensive plan. We have our comprehensive plan is the 2035 comprehensive plan, and the next one will have a later horizon year. So the question was, how do we make decisions in our right of way consistent with that plan? So we found that to be not intuitive, so we rebranded it as Streets PDX. And so again, We have a street types page where there's basically an overview page that kind of helps describe the difference between the street types. You can sort of scroll through them here, or you can just, select go right to the particular street type that you're interested in. A bigger view of the images, and we speak to considerations related to pedestrians, bicycles, greening. I mentioned that these growth corridors tend to be priorities for multiple modes of transportation. This is not the case for all street types. So you can learn about what our policies say about these different streets. The city projects is really just that three-phased. It sort of describes that approach I was just describing about how you can use the map to identify the streets and their policies and get to the matrix comparison in the handbook. Our development improvements page, again, so we have this link. If we click on the tree preservation and planting site link, it talks about the city standards for preserving existing trees, clearances, et cetera, links to code, but it's brief. And then if we want to learn more about street tree requirements, we can click on this link and we get access to the code around our tree preservation standards, our tree planting standards, the approved tree planting lists, where the clearance requirements live, the administrative rule around tree removal and replacement procedures. Again, I think this information is not always well understood by other bureaus or maybe the public. So we're just trying to consolidate all the information so it's easier for people to access the information that they need. This right-of-way policies is basically what that link to more information goes directly to that page. There's the street map, as I mentioned here. And one of the things that's kind of cool that our web developers were able to do, if I click on any street, I'll just click on Belmont, and you say, oh, it's a neighborhood main street. I don't know what that is, or what's a city bikeway? You can click on it and it'll take you to a description of what city bikeways are. So it gives people an ability to really explore. And again, we have a lot of policies in this city, and it's hard to kind of know what's relevant for each one's. And then, like I said, you can either access the cross sections from your particular street where the shading happens automatically, or you can go right to the cross sections page itself. You don't have to go to a street to get to it. And this is where you can navigate to the different widths. And you can hide sections, you can see the legend, you can click. And if you want to understand, how we consider greening scores in this matrix, it's here. And then that handbook is linked off of the bottom. So I think it's probably a lot. So I'll pause and open it up for questions or discussion. If there are any. I see Bruce's hand. I don't know if somebody typically calls on folks.
Matt, could you unshare your screen?
If you put,
Yes, for sure.
that's what I was gonna say.
Okay.
Because we can't see who's raising their hands.
Okay,
Perfect, thank you.
sounds good.
I'm not sure who is up first. Not sure who's up first. Megan has that question. Katie.
I think
Wait, I'll
was.
just go in the order of my screen.
Fine.
Bruce was first. Okay. Bruce, you're on.
My question is, Matt, how does this website get updated when there's some change in a policy by this or that department? Is it, is it months? Is it instant? Is it 5 years? Because is that budgeted to get make sure the website's current?
Yeah, that's a good question. So to the extent where we link to other bureaus' rules and standards, right? Like, for example, we link to the Stormwater Management Manual. If they update the Stormwater Management Manual, the place that it's linked to, that aspect of the administrative rule, it will be the same link. That said, periodically a brand new policy may be created, in which case we'll have to update that ourselves. One of the ways that we tried to address this, certainly there's going to be periodic updates as this is used and we see and learn about how useful it is and ways we can improve it. But one of the page that links the right-of-way policies page, our web developers built this site and we explicitly made the page linking to policies something that I have easier access to update. So it's just so that we're not.
Who's Matt? He looks frozen.
Is that just us or?
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Matt, you might want to turn your video off if you can hear me. I hope he's not still talking.
Well, maybe if we've lost Matt for the time being, if there's any other questions, Belinda's been representing urban forestry in this project for the last few months, so she might be able to answer some of the questions that are left. We'll just wait for Matt to hop back on.
Yeah, and
Megan, I think you're next. Yeah.
yeah, and if anything, we can also, if someone can capture with staff and send them to Matt, if Matt can't get them, that'd be great. You know, the question I was going to ask is Matt talked about kind of some of the equity considerations that urban forestry staff had brought up. And we have been very lucky in this city to have like urban heat island mapping. And it would be amazing to see, like, we're talking about a lot of concrete, like these streets. So it would be very interesting to see how that's informing some of their decision making around these. Hi, Matt.
Sorry, I think sometimes my Wi-Fi drops. I'm in a conference room.
Oh.
So I'm not sure if you got my whole answer, Bruce. Yeah, we try to create as much flexibility so that I can update this, you know, to be responsive to that.
Yeah. And
Did you, Megan, did you?
yeah, Matt, I'll try to be very succinct.
Yeah,
I was just saying, you talked about kind of some of the equity considerations urban forestry staff brought up, and we were very lucky because of Dr. Shondas and others to have some, you know, urban heat island like mapping tools and other equity mapping tools. I don't know if that's been incorporated in some of these decision makings around how you're prioritizing those trade-offs, but I think that feels like a powerful tool at our hands. So that's my question. And my other comment, and I always say this, is visuals matter, and the trees in those images are tiny. Like if you look at your visual images, they're like the smallest tree. They're like 15-foot trees compared to a 30-foot building. And they have no space in those visuals, like from a soil volume and root volume. Like, so if that's what we're visually demonstrating to people is we want small street trees and tiny spaces with no soil volume, we're gonna get that. So I always point out visuals communicate, and those are tiny. So
Great. Let me take your first question, and then I'll take your second comment. So let's see. I'm not sharing my screen, but I will just say that for example, some of the I heard about the urban heat island concerns. I've read the documentation and whatnot. So, for example, on our largest streets, right, which some of our largest streets are in East Portland, where we have large amounts of pavement next to substandard sidewalks, next to parking lots, right? So those streets do make those street type descriptions do make reference to the need to address urban heat islands. So we kind of brought that perspective into it. I believe in the tree, the information related to tree preservation and planting requirements, we added a link to urban forestry's tree planting priority areas, which I think gets at some of the equity work. And as that's updated, we can replace that approach. But I think that part is, I think within all of these, I think the challenge we had was to like consolidate, can't include everything from everybody, but we did our best to really kind of get at those considerations. And we got similar comments from urban forestry about the trees in these images, and we did our best to make them larger. And are you talking about in the street images or the one about the development?
all of the above.
All of the above. Yeah.
Including
we did our
in the
best to make
yard
them
tree
larger.
images, make them big.
Yeah. Okay, I'll take that comment under advisement. So I understand your point.
Good. Looks like we have a couple of the questions. We have about 8 more minutes on this topic. So Casey and then Roberta.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Matthew, for the presentation. One thing I wanted to know is that if there is some amount of priority given where you can say, okay, on this street, we want to give the maximum priority to street trees and see how that adjusts all the other priorities around. And that comes in concert with wondering about the climate change and equity goals from the city. So for instance, raising the canopy and all the other things you talked about from urban heat island effect. Is there a means to say, well, with all these other infrastructure components put in, we also as a city are prioritizing capturing carbon and lowering the urban heat island effect, which would seem to put the trees and other green infrastructure on a higher priority than other things. So is that a means that's going to be built in kind of in a functionality, like on this street, we want to prioritize trees, therefore all the other priorities kind of can be shifted around?
Good question. This was my experience managing this project, is that the variety of sort of contexts that exist both in a development or a city project, and the different types of infrastructure and the different types of times that they may have a potential conflict between them, it just became exponential so quickly, right? Because you can imagine there's all the different bureaus, and then within a different bureau, they're not all the same. They have different types of infrastructure. It just became so sort of overwhelming in that regard. And sometimes we found things like, certain streets are, if I'm talking to the bike advisory committee, that street where we may say greening is of trees are of paramount importance, they'll say, well, that street is extremely important for bicycling because of the climate, because of it's like, it became just very hard to say, I'm going to put one person on top of one use on top of another use. And so what we've really tried to do is try to bring a more nuanced approach in terms of like, let's have better understanding of the needs of that sidewalk, of that tree, of that, we tried to just bring it together in a slightly, just bring better information so that it's not just, if it's staff having a conversation, they're not having it sort of in the abstract of like, well, my job is to represent trees and my job is to represent sidewalks. And so we tried to just bring it together in that way, though I understand what you're asking for. I just didn't see like a really clear way to do that.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah.
Roberta?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Great presentation. And 2 things. One is I really want to commend you and the teams for dealing with the subsurface vault and transformer situation. That's really, really, really important. That's going to be a change, I imagine, that's going to be tough to implement given, conventional design and expectations of practitioners. So I guess my hope is that you are going to be monitoring how that works out. I'm really curious, and I'd like to see a process for, monitoring how it works when, and the different design options that people are coming up with in terms of creativity, but also the extent to which people are applying for that exception.
Yep.
And, and how the city is going to be dealing with those exceptions. Are they going to be, approved? Or are they going to be, where's the burden of proof kind of thing? Because I think for something to be an exception, that'll be a really different approach.
Right.
And there needs to be education and outreach around that too, to, designers, builders, architects, utilities.
Yep.
So,
yeah, that's a great point. And we did update our rules around this already, so that, and we went to the Development Review Advisory Committee. We partner with our colleagues at the Bureau of Development Services who have these early assistance meetings with developers. And so they've put into their materials and, plan for power on site early. We have guide there. I can send a link to a page that describes this, and it gives people just more information about what their options are. And, one of the things that we were seeing in the data was that, there were, because there wasn't, a real stringent set of sort of decision-making criteria, right? We were seeing transformers in the right of way, starting to happen throughout the city, right? In places with lower ground floor activation requirements, or, oftentimes the activation requirements are less on a side street than they are on maybe the commercial main street. So like there are already options, you know what I'm saying? There was like, some of this infrastructure was being in the right of way, even though you could already have met the activation requirements. So all this to say is we have seen very few to no applications for this yet. It's been in place for not quite a year. But so I think so far, from we stay in communication with BDS, and it seems like so far people are getting the message to plan for power. So I don't think there will be zero cases. I think you might have a very small, quarter block development in a downtown context. If it meets all the criteria, there may be an instance. But again, even then, I think BDS and the Design Commission also recognize the value of trees to the urban context. So
that's really great. One other thing, Megan and Casey kind of grabbed my thought as you were talking. I kept writing, what about heat? What about heat? What about heat? And I feel like, as we look at trade-offs, there's a lot of really interesting stuff, the specs in relationship to zoning and all these elements of the right-of-way. But one of the trade-offs that really ought to be modeled and brought into that trade-off analysis that you're asking folks to support is some sort of heat modeling and direct attention to that. So I'll just flag that, and maybe that's a thing to think about getting in place. So
sure.
Thanks. Thank you all. Okay, thank you so much, Matthew, for your presentation, and everyone for their comments. We're going to move on now to the trees fee schedule update.
All right, thanks, Adrian. Okay, just on my laptop, so I just have one screen. Let me get things pulled up here. So, yeah, every year we bring an update on the Urban Forestry's fee schedule to City Council. So for some of the newer commissioners, I'll give a little bit of a background on this. So Urban Forestry's permitting and regulation team is partially funded by fees. We divide our fees into two different types, development fees and non-development fees. Non-development fees are typically, your standard tree removal replanting permit. So this is property owner has a tree in their backyard, they'd like to have it removed. That requires a permit from forestry, and there's a fee assessed with that. On the development side, this is for, whenever there's a development situation, Urban Forestry has regulatory responsibilities, and the city policy is to generally recover the full cost of those services. So to pass on the full cost of those to the whoever is to developing the property and paying those fees. So these fees are a really critical source of funding for Urban Forestry, and we, along with every other bureau in the city that charges similar fees, we bring an updated fee schedule to City Council every year for their consideration. So this is a short briefing on the changes that Urban Forestry is proposing for the next fiscal year. The city has a July 1st to June 30th fiscal year. So this updated fee schedule would go into effect on July 1st. So with that, I'll go into some of the changes we're proposing. So you have the fee schedule in your packets. It's the markup version where we show the current fees in the fiscal year, and then in red on the far right, you'll see the updated fee schedules. And I can share my screen in a minute to show that as well. For the next fiscal year, we are proposing a 5% increase to all the development fees. This is really in line with the anticipated increase in the hourly rate for tree inspection services. This hourly rate is set by the Parks Finance team, and that really gives us guidance on what is the cost of delivering those tree inspection services. We are also proposing, so in addition to the 5% increase, I want to note that one of our fees is increasing by more than 5%, and that is the development violation inspection fee. That's going up by a little more than 5%, and that's really just to bring that fee amount in line with other development fees that are really for the same sort of service. So it's really just aligning those fees so that we're charging the same amount for similar service being provided there. And then in addition to that, we have one new fee that we're adding. This is called the Code Hearings Filing Penalty Fee. This one's a little bit more complicated, but that is a fee that we are adding. It's a similar fee charged by other bureaus, including the Bureau of Development Services. And the purpose of that fee is to partially recoup costs when unresolved violations proceed to the code hearings office. So we don't talk about the code hearings office very often at the Forestry Commission, but it is a process for reviewing and resolving disputes and violations, and other bureaus charge this fee when it's a violation that has not been resolved. So just noting that in addition to our 5% development fee increase, those two changes are being made as well. And I presented these fee changes this morning to the city's Development Review Advisory Committee, and no, they didn't have any concerns with these. And beyond that, we're not proposing any changes to the non-development fees, like the tree removal permit, like I mentioned earlier. The one exception, and I will share my screen right now just so you can see the fee schedule. I need to zoom in so you can see that better. Sorry, my screen is doing funny things. I will know that there is one fee you'll see in the non-development section that's changed. That's the route inspection fee. The reason that's changing is that's the same fee as is in the development section as well. And so in order to update one, we really have to update the other. So that's the reason you're seeing a fee change there. That's all that I wanted to present. So I'm happy to take any questions on this right now.
I'm gonna add something, and thank you very much, Brian, and for attending DRAC this morning right before this meeting. And that is, some of you commissioners who've been here a while may remember this, others have not had the opportunity to hear it. As Brian said, development services, the city's policy is to recoup those costs. That is what the fee does. In non-development, our approach has been to try to, in effect, subsidize, right? We want people to get permits. We want them to do permitted activities. So while those non-development permits are a service, it's applying the city's regulations and involves staff time and programming and those sorts of things. There are costs. We have kept those as low as we can. And for example, planting permit for right-of-way remains free. Tree pruning permit for street trees, those remain free. And then the largest of the non-development permit types in terms of the volume of the permits we get, which is the tree removal and replacement or planting permit. That one, the cost would be much higher if it were full cost recovery. We keep that as low as we can. I think that
anything else?
The commission, sorry, Adrian, I hesitated.
No, it's okay. Yeah, I was wondering.
The commission's role here is like we're informing the commission. If you have any comments or questions, we're happy to hear those and take that in. There isn't a vote or anything. This isn't something that needs commission approval or that type of thing.
Any questions or comments, commissioners? Okay, yeah, and maybe if you could, Bruce, yeah, if you could stop the screen sharing, then we could see. Sure. Great, thank you.
One comment and one question. Would the question is, if you charged a fee for the non-development requesting for planting trees, would that expedite the time length that it's currently taking? I've heard as long as 10 weeks. For getting a permit to plant a street tree, which actually eliminates some people from planting a street tree. So if there was a fee involved, would that happen any more quickly? Or is that just the way it goes? And then the comment is, I think it would be very helpful sometime to have a long agenda time where we got a description for what actually each of these services are. So it's clearer. It's a little overwhelming to see these. And if I think of buying a house or building a house, I'm wondering which one, how many of these apply. So I don't know if that would be helpful to other commissioners, but I personally would appreciate that.
Yeah, Bruce, thanks. Casey Jokers, our permanent regulation manager, was at this meeting. She actually had to jump off to go to another meeting that's actually on development, the city's development permit process improvement work. So that's why she's unfortunately not able to be here. I think in terms of charging a fee for a street tree planting permit, you know, if Urban Forestry had more staff, then permit turnaround times would be reduced. I don't know how much revenue that would actually raise, since the volume of those is not particularly high. But that's definitely something that I could talk to Casey about and try and follow up on. I know that our staff have done a really fantastic job getting those turnaround times down in the last few weeks and months. So I don't believe it's nearly that high anymore, but I can talk to her and provide some follow-up information.
I'm going to add to that, Bruce, as well. That was an abnormally long turnaround time.
Yeah.
Our normal turnaround times are 2 to 4 weeks. However, get ready for this. This is going to shock you. Remember that big snowstorm last April 11th? That created like a domino effect of overloaded work. We had nowhere near the staff to do that kind of thing, nor would we necessarily staff to take on, you know, ongoing, have all the staff available to do storm response for something like that. And that is why for a couple months this winter, our permit turnaround times were really slow. Fortunately, with the parks levy, we were of course working to try to add staff. And we are doing that. So not only should we not be in that situation too often, where we have such a workload that folks are just not able to do it, but we will have more staff ongoing.
Thank you.
And then I just want to acknowledge Megan and Leah's comment in the chat that yes, the reason we don't charge a fee is we want to encourage street tree planting. So we want to try to remove every barrier possible. So appreciate those comments as well. And then Bruce, to your second question, I would be very interested if the commission wanted to receive a briefing on that. I think Casey and her team would be thrilled to share some of the complexities that go into the permitting and regulation program. It is an enormous amount of work. And I think that if the commission is interested in that level of detail, I think we'd be thrilled actually to share some of that. It's not something we get to talk about very often. So it's definitely something that we can look to fit in. It does depend on the type of development activity occurring. Often it's just one of those fees. That's really how they're structured, but depending on how complex it is, and whether there's work being done both on the site, but also in the right of way, which triggers a public works process, there can be a few more fees assessed. So yeah, we'd be happy to do that. And the city does put out, the Bureau of Development Services puts out a document which shows the breakdown of every single fee associated with development based on the development type, which often shows that urban forestry's fees account for 0.8% of the total fees associated with development. So we're a small part of it in terms of the dollar amount, but obviously a really critical part in terms of preserving trees and getting street tree planted as well. JR, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, just if we do get a presentation like that, I would love to see the full cost of what it takes for this to happen versus like how much we're charging them. So essentially how much we're subsidizing developers for the their work here for trees. Just so that we don't get pushed back on like, oh, you raised it the cost for this. I'm like, well, we're already subsidizing X amount. So that would be good too. Thank you.
That's a great question. Thanks, JR. Our current estimates are that our development fees are around 85% of the cost to develop the service. This is sort of a side note, but the Bureau is undertaking a cost recovery analysis, which is really going to look at all the fees the Bureau charges and working with a consultant on that. So Urban Forestry is participating in that work. So I think we might have sort of like updated analysis as a result of that. But right now, you're absolutely right. We think we're a little bit under full cost recovery.
I'd like to comment. Sorry, Adrian. I wanted to add something. Brian had mentioned that Casey Jogers, who's the manager for permitting and regulation in Urban Forestry, was here. Traditionally, you've really just worked with Brian, me, and more recently Ashley as commissioners. The way it's usually done with other advisory groups is the managers or representative staff from different programs come and attend. For example, the Parks Board, I go to Parks Board meetings because I represent urban forestry and all the other divisions are represented. So we have never been able to do that because we've never had enough staff to do that. We now, with the Parks Levy funds, have been able to staff up. For the first time, we have managers who are managing instead of managing and supervising. We now have supervisors. So long story short, Casey was here because I've asked all of our managers to try to start attending all the commission meetings. And that is so that they are here to answer your questions in more detail. And I wanted you to know that because that may lead you to think of future agenda items. And this was a great example, like delving into what are the permitting and regulatory fees, or what types of activities are those, and having those people here to talk to you about them. So keep thinking that way. In the future, you'll see Angie DeSalvo here, our Science Outreach and Planting Manager, and you'll see Paul Anderson here, our Tree Maintenance Operations Manager, as well as Casey. And thank you, Parks Levy, and everyone who voted for it.
Thanks for the presentation, and looks like folks are done with questions, and we have one more agenda item for which we have a half hour, and that's follow up on the Mississippi Heritage Tree case. And what I thought we could do was have Jen give us an update on what's happened with that, and then sort of have, you know, a lot of folks have had time to think about this, and you know, have a little bit of a round robin where we each get a minute to sort of talk about where we're at and what our hopes are with this, and then sort of take it from there. So Jen, would you like to give us an update?
Yes, I will. I'll mention too, Rob Yamachika is here. Hello, Rob. Rob is our city attorney, who works with us in urban forestry. So the update from the last time we talked about this at a commission meeting is there have been developments. Victoria, Mrs. Burton, reached out to see if urban forestry could fund treating the tree against elm leaf beetle and to for some pruning. And the permits for that work had already been issued for that tree care. Although private property care is the property owner's responsibility, for this situation, we looked for that funding in order to help the Burtons out. We conferred with the city attorney and found that no urban forestry funds can be used in this way for private property tree care. So we looked for other possible city funding sources, however, found nothing applicable. City resources for private property care are generally geared towards owner-occupied properties and or property owners experiencing low income. And the Burtons' addresses weren't registered in those programs. So we then advised the Burtons that some local tree care providers had sometimes done pro bono free tree care for heritage trees and provided the local tree care provider program list. So they might contact some of those folks and see if it might be possible. And we looked for possible private funding sources. The African American Alliance for Homeownership agreed to fund the tree work. And they are working directly with the Burtons, and some of that tree care has been completed with more to come. That is the update I wanted to provide for you.
And that was like
Okay, thank you.
Right.
Just to make sure that I know which commissioners are in the room, which ones are in the room versus on the screen? Those on the screen I can see.
I'm in the room. I'm not on the screen.
That was Justin.
Okay, I thought that was you. Okay, and Daryl Lee is the only one who's not present. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
You should know, I'm also in the room, Casey Clapp.
Great, Casey. Very good. Well, why don't we, take a moment to go around the room. Let's try to limit it to a minute. for each commissioner, just to sort of see after you've had some time to sort of think about this and the issues and hearing the update and so forth, what you think we should do going forward and why. So just going to, briefly get to that. So Roberta, did you have a comment first or?
Yeah, just a clarifying question. This is not my
Yes.
opinion.
Yeah.
Jen, could you say more about the work that's been done? Funded by the African American Homeowners Association in conjunction with the Burtons. What can you tell us a little more about the type of work that's been done or possible?
Sure. African American
And
Association.
the amount of funding, if we know that.
Can y'all hear me? Okay. It's the African American Alliance for Homeownership. And the request was for $2,200 for the work. The work that's been done so far is some pruning to raise some branches off of from near a nearby building, and I think perhaps also some dead wooding, which is removing dead branches. And the other work, which probably has not happened quite yet, is inoculating the tree to treat it for the elm bug beetle, so that population will be reduced and managed.
Let's see, comment for Megan, for ease, do we want to go alphabetically? That might be harder for me to do than the list of around the room, but yeah, I appreciate the thought. I'm just going to go ahead and go with the screen view, if that's okay, and my screen view in order. So what I have is Bruce, and then I have those that are actually in the room, and Roberta. I'll just go along the line. I think that'll be a little easier. Bruce, thoughts?
My questions are for the city attorney. I'd like to know if this particular tree is delisted, what are the ramifications for other private property heritage trees in the city of Portland? The second question is, if this tree is delisted and removed, does that affect the grounds on which private property owners can use when they request the removal of any large tree in their yard?
So I don't think, to answer your first question, first of all, as I understand it, there was a 5-4 vote not to delist this tree in the previous March meeting. So this tree is currently not being delisted. What your considerations for one heritage tree to the next, there's no precedent. It's each individual tree. So the ramifications for other heritage tree owners, there aren't any, if based on your decision that you make on this particular tree. And then your second question.
Second question is, frequently we have property owners that want a large tree removed in their yard because it's a mess and a lot of work for them and a burden. And frequently the decision, urban forestry has an inspector go there. Is it dead, diseased, and dying? If it's none of that, then generally the tree stays. And since none of those are the case in this situation, I'm just wondering if this sets a precedent that other property owners could use when they want to remove a tree in their yard.
So it's two separate questions, right? So this is a heritage tree versus a tree removal permit is what you're talking about.
I want to know if, yeah, this one is a heritage tree, but will a decision on a heritage tree, could that be used as a basis for why someone should be allowed to remove a non-heritage tree on private property?
I don't think so. I see Jen's hand. Yeah. And then I also did see a comment. Somebody said it was inaccurate. There were 5 of the votes to delist, but we needed 6. So
that's right.
Yes, that's correct. So there were, as I understand it, 9 commissioners, 5 voted to delist, 4 voted not to, and you were missing 2, but you needed 6 to delist. So thanks for that clarification.
So Bruce, the difference here is this particular tree, which happens to be a heritage tree, is within 10 feet of a permanent structure. And that is a provision of Title 11. That is what I call removal by right. So it doesn't matter what condition the tree is in, we have to give a permit for that removal. So if this tree were delisted and it were more than 10 feet from a permanent structure, it would have to meet the removal criteria for all trees on private property, not just heritage trees. It would have to be dead, dying, or dangerous to be removed.
Okay.
But it is in the 10 feet, so it would be removal by right. The thing that's keeping it from being removed now by right is the fact that it is a heritage tree.
Thanks, Bruce. Just want to note we have 22 minutes left and probably everyone, wants to have a comment. So I am going to move to those who are in the room. We have Casey and Justin. I have in that order. So Casey, your hope's very brief. Please keep it to a minute, folks.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you. I'm happy that the Burdens are back here and that we are all listening again for this. We've all spent quite a bit of time. So I think that I'm still confident in the way that the vote happened the last time. I'm very happy to see that there has been some extra additional funding to take care of the things that Ms. Burden has specifically called out as the main issue for why this tree needs to be removed was the beetles. You said that last week or last time we met.
It doesn't get rid of them out of the house.
So I am happy that there is some funding that's coming that way. I brought up last time several different things that I don't need to rehash about slight differences in this situation and how that if this was not a tree and in a different situation, we wouldn't be here having this discussion. This is a heritage tree and the heritage tree program is an opt-in program. It is different than other city and larger issues that have caused displacement of people of color in the city of Portland before. So in this case, I have nothing really to add other than please go back and if you need to listen and read through everything that we had said last time, because I think even after the meeting had ended, there was still some conversation that happened. So I don't have a whole lot other to add at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Casey. Justin?
Yeah, so I just want to comment on, so we heard that there has been some funding from a community organization for the Burdens. I just want to remind other commissioners that just because there is funding right now does not mean the Burdens will always find assistance with this. And also based on the estimates we received before, the funding that they've gotten assistance with is a small drop in how much funding is needed to take care of this tree. Also, I want to reiterate that we've heard from many community members and community organizations that this tree is perpetuating institutional racism in our city. And I want to remind commissioners that when it comes to situations like institutional and systematic racism, you're either anti-racist or you're complicit with racism. And voting to not end the institutional racism we're seeing with this tree is being complicit. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Justin. Okay, let's see. Roberta, you're next on the screen.
Okay, thank you, and thanks to everyone. I like a number of you, I'm sure, are pleased that there's been some investment in addressing the problems raised. My sense would be that this African American Homeowners Alliance is providing funding in good faith to invest in the tree, to prune the tree, and to help address the beetle population. It's not probably enough to fix it, as Justin has pointed out. I support the Burtons, the city, and others, perhaps us, in helping to continue to find funding to help alleviate the problem. I'm hoping some of those funds might be able to be used for air spading to see if there's been any damage to the foundation. I saw this tree. I went to go see the tree since we met last. It is huge. It is iconic. It shades half the street and a transit stop, which is important to that area. And hundreds of people walk by it while I was in the neighborhood, or drove by it. So I feel like our obligation is to look for ways to try to retain this heritage tree and to ensure that the Burdens don't lose their property by providing what assistance is possible to help address the issues. I would continue to vote to do that rather than to delist a tree that qualifies and that is an important part of canopy in a canopy deficient area where we have disparities that are also disproportionately affecting folks who live there and work there, as well as other parts of the city. Thanks.
Thanks, Roberta. Leah?
I think the fact that the Burtons are still here asking us to delist this tree shows that the funding that they are receiving is not adequate, that this is not solving the problem for them. And so I'm going to continue to urge us to think about, it doesn't sound like we're setting a precedent here necessarily from what we've heard. And I appreciate our legal advice being here to help us with this. I know that was an important question for a lot of people. And I would just say, if we're so worried about the shade equity, but then we're putting that over keeping a Black family as a homeowner, then who is the shade for? That's like the definition of green gentrification. So this is supposed to be about people. And we say we care about Black Portlanders, but this is showing that that's not, the actions here are not showing that. So that's all I'll say for now.
Thanks, Leah. Megan?
I'm going to focus my questions on, or my time on a question. I made strong comments last time that are still all how I feel. So none of that has changed. I guess my question is, from my recollection, right, the cost for the Burtons is about $40,000 to $60,000, right? So we're not just talking about pruning during the 3 years of treatment, right? We're also talking about the fact that it is a home that they can't rent. And I don't think that there is money, to my understanding, but please correct me if I'm inaccurate, to cover the cost of not being able to get rental income for a house that they're paying for. And there was also other information about just other concrete damage, foundation damage, and being able to rent. So I think knowing that there's potentially money to help with some pruning or injections is helpful, but it is my understanding that there's a much larger cost. And if I understand, but maybe the Burtons could correct that, without, even with assistance for caring for the tree itself, it seems like they do not have the funding still to retain this property. So I agree. Still with also the knowledge, just to say that they did not opt into this knowingly. So that's my question, comment.
Thank you, Megan. Melinda, next.
Similarly, my comments from the last meeting also stand. I just believe that this is a very time-sensitive issue. If they are delving into their retirement in order to pay for this mortgage monthly and are not able to rent, this is an immediate need. This isn't something that, you know, we absolutely could fund injections that will get rid of the beetles in the house in 2 years, but it's not helping them save their home right now. And so I think it's the immediacy of the need and their ownership that is really on the table. Of course, the tree is very important, but people are more so.
Thank you, Melinda. Ivory.
Hi, everyone. I wasn't able to make it to the last meeting where a lot of the comments were made, but I've kind of jotted down my thoughts just to keep me focused. So it seems that there are about 300 trees over the course of 17 to 20 years of homeowners that may not have had a reasonable ability to know whether their tree, the tree on their property, had been listed in the Heritage Tree Program. So rather than thinking about creating a precedent for homeowners to remove heritage trees, I encourage the city to think about what it will do to provide remedy for only those homeowners who may have been adversely impacted by the Heritage Tree Program, such as the scenario that is surrounding Heritage Tree number 26. Remedy could look like a fund of monies dedicated to address and treat heritage trees listed before the requirement to tie the heritage tree listing designation to the titles. And I bring that up because there's a lot of emotions. There's a lot of factors at play, but what stands out to me is the ability or the reasonable ability to know what you're getting. And since that change happened later on, maybe 2010, 2015, there are a number of property owners who may be in this same situation. Anyone coming in after that change, okay, sure, they would know. But what about the folks who didn't know? And now they're being told, oh, you can't do this and that with the property that they may have done their due diligence on. They may have already paid for a title search to make sure they were not in this very situation. So I encourage us to think about what can we do for those folks who we already know may be in this situation. So rather than waiting for the next disaster to happen, what can we do now to ensure that if they run into some type of need, that we're here to help? And also, I would encourage us to be mindful of what message we're sending to our community, all Portlanders, to even want to consider being in this Heritage Tree program, if this is what this could amount to. And that's all I'll say.
Thank you so much, Ivory. JR?
Yes, thank you. One, I appreciate everyone being able to share comments and everything, and we have a space to, we can still reach the same mission, and we can still disagree. We still move forward. I think our passions is forward. So thank you everyone for that. Main comments I think are around the process. This has been, I think, I appreciate that there's more order in this meeting. There's role for public comment, and then that's made, and then there's space for commissioners. I think our conversation, our dialogue is important. Hearing what everyone else is thinking is part of the process and helps like influence my decision on things. So I appreciate that. And there is space for additional comment, like to follow up afterwards and things too. So I am in favor of delisting this tree, and I would vote to do so. And if there is a vote, I would, appreciate that, but give the opportunity for those two who weren't able to make it to the last meeting. If that's possible, I would love to move forward with that. And my reasons for that is mainly, I think there is a process in place, but the process wasn't set up for everyone. And the part of the process is this discussion. Part of this process is our weighing in, and we're not voting to delist the tree. I think the delisting technically happens with city council. We're just offering a recommendation. And so without it's just a recommendation. It's not officially delisting. City council setting precedent or not, that's up to them. And there's another process in place for that. So just where we play our role in this, I'm in favor of that. I think the process of our dialogue and human beings reviewing it, hearing it, and being able to offer our opinion to it can bring balance to the systemic issues that we're facing. Thank you.
Thanks, JR. Melinda?
I already spoke.
Oh, sorry about that. I missed my check marks. Great. Okay. I guess anyone else besides me hasn't gotten an opportunity to speak. Okay. The amazing thing about this is I sort of agree with everybody. And the only thing that I don't, I think the difference is there's like, what do we do about it? Right. Probably in our heart of hearts, we don't like to save this magnificent tree. But we also want justice for the family, and we want justice in the Heritage Tree program. So that's really what I'm struggling with. I'm still where I was at, which is that I don't think the tree qualifies for delisting. And there are all these very compelling issues for the family that we need to continue to work to help them to solve. But I don't want to damn this whole program. So I am very, and the other difficult thing, I think for me conceptually, is that say we vote and recommend delisting to city council, and that's, there's nothing else attached. And then we're going to have a committee, then we're going to have a real community hearing where there won't only essentially be the representatives that the family has invited, but the full community. And I'm just concerned that our recommendation will essentially come off as half-baked, meaning that we're not getting to the core. If we just recommend delisting and don't actually talk about the larger issues that are concerning us with this tree and program, it's actually going to reduce the efficacy of our commission. And so my personal feeling is I would rather go to city council and say, here's what, we had this case, here are the issues that came up, and here are the corrections we would like to see happen in this program to avoid this situation happening in the future. So, that's sort of where I'm at. I think there's a lot of evidence that the Heritage Tree program is not equitable. What can we do to fix that? I mean, is it really reasonable to expect private citizens to have like a bottomless pit, right, of money for this? Or are there reasonable situations where the city should or could step in? And, especially for lower income individuals or in areas of the city where there's lower trade equity. So, other things came up that are probably a little less strategic or important, but still important, like, what are really the criteria we should be using to delist heritage trees? And should they be updated for economic hardship? Anyway, that's kind of where I'm at. And I see a couple of hands. Roberta, I think yours was up first.
Yeah, we just, we have Roberta, Casey, and then Justin has his hand raised in the room as well.
Okay. One final quick thing is I feel like we will be a lot more powerful if we could come to a consensus on what to do around this versus, in terms of the bigger issues, rather than sending something, sort of half-baked and emotional to city council. That's my personal opinion.
We have 5 minutes. I was going to bring a motion to vote.
Just one quick thing, Justin.
Roberta?
If there's a motion to vote, and it sounds like there may be, or if either way, typically the commission would put together a letter for the council that would state its recommendations and its rationale for that. And potentially, as someone mentioned in the last meeting, the things we grapple with, dissenting views and so forth. So that would need to be taken care of. And at such time, if it does go to council, then I would expect that that there would be Forestry Commission presentation of the recommendation to the council as part of the invited presentation, as well as other people being able to speak. So it would give it the opportunity to share those concerns and those hopes.
Mm-hmm. Casey, just real quickly, if you have just a 10-second comment.
Yeah, 10 seconds. I just wanted to address one question that Leah put in there, which is how does the delisting this specific tree affect the whole program? And in my experience as a city inspector at one point, there is no legal precedent, as our legal counsel kind of discussed, but there is a precedent of other people who have heritage trees who have a potential for development to come to us and say, this is an economic reason that I need to remove this tree aside from everything else. So it opens up the door for any other development or any other property owner who has some idea that they want to do something with their property, that the tree as a heritage tree explicitly is trying to prioritize this tree. So that's the way that it could ramify, not in an official legal sense, but in a unofficial yet still applicable sense to the rest of this program throughout the city.
Ivory, final quick comment.
And I kind of put it in the chat. My comment is, can we have multiple votes? The first being that the city creates remedies for those heritage tree owners who were added to the program before the title list requirement was in play. And 2, to then vote on whether we retain listing or delisting status for this particular heritage tree number 26. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks for that. I'll answer that really quickly. Yes, absolutely. Both can be done. I would just recommend, there's been a lot of discussion on the delisting issue of this particular tree. I would recommend having that be the motion for this meeting. I think it's absolutely worth having a larger conversation around what support can be provided. I think that UFC's vote on that in terms of making a recommendation would be more impactful if we had more discussion that involves staff about what options are available and what could be done. So just for the sake of time in this meeting, I would prioritize a motion where there's been a good bit of discussion.
Good. I have one quick question, actually, since we have our attorney. Do we need to have a motion first for reconsideration? Or can we just open it to the floor for any motion?
So there's 2 options. You can do a motion for reconsideration, which, looking at Robert's rules, typically that needs to be made by a member who was on the prevailing side of the previous decision or non-decision to delist. So those that voted not to delist would be the prevailing side. The other option, there's nothing in our bylaws or code that I found that precludes this matter from being heard again, reintroduced. So it's not a motion to reconsider, it's just bringing it again. So I looked at your agenda. This was noticed as a discussion on Heritage Tree number 26. The last time around, a month ago, it was on the agenda as a request to delist. So I've got some concerns on notice to the public, because I know that there was some public comment last time, at least in writing. I don't know if you had testimony from the public. So
comment this morning.
So I don't know if you're thinking of voting right now on whether or not to delist or list this, keep it listed today. I don't know if that's the best course. The other thing I would recommend, somebody said that Dearly wasn't here. I don't know how many commissioners you've got, if you've got 10 or if it's obviously not the full 11. One thing I would recommend, what we call for the Ninth Circuit, is an en banc hearing where you have every single commissioner available, because this seems to be an important and somewhat, I don't know if contentious is the right word, but there's obviously a difference in opinion. So I think you need a full commission to make this decision.
11, the full commissioners?
How much is that here now?
I think we're only missing one person at this point.
But you voted last time when you only
You voted
had
with 9 last time. You voted with 9 the last time, you know.
You voted with, can I just say, we have been, I have been before.
I would call point of order and allow the commission to discuss.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, please. Thank you. Brian, how would you like to approach this? We just got a recommendation from Rob that we should.
I think my only, and Rob, I don't know if this is influencing it, but I know that code doesn't require a public hearing for the UFC to consider this. I don't know if that changes the interpretation of posting or not. That was the only thing I wanted to note.
And I'd add to that, Rob, we have had a lot of public comment on this. It's all been in favor of, almost all been in favor of delisting the tree. I don't know that that would change because we will not be holding a hearing, so it will not be advertised widely. It will only be the folks close to it who know about it. And we may never have 11 commissioners in a room. We can't guarantee that.
That's fine. I mean, like I said, that's my recommendation, because obviously you'd like to have everybody participate. That's one of the things in your bylaws is to try to get equitable participation. I understand if it's not, I mean, you're free to disregard that. I mean, this is my kind of perfect world type advice. So
that's your job. Thank you.
Yeah, Megan.
Well, and it seems like we do have the option, if someone wants to make a motion, and we have yet to hear what Justin's motion is. So perhaps we could find out what the motion is that Justin was planning to potentially make.
Yeah, my motion is vote to recommend to delist this tree on the grounds that it's creating economic hardship for the owners and it's perpetuating racial inequity.
And do we have a second?
I second.
Just to be clear,
Okay.
Justin, were you on the prevailing side last time around?
No, so this is a new motion.
Okay, I'm gonna go around the room exactly the way I did, or at least in my list in order if I have it written down, to just get a yay or a nay on that. So Bruce?
Bruce, you're on mute.
Nay.
Okay, and in the room, I've got next, I've got Casey.
Nay.
Okay, Justin.
Yay.
Okay, Megan.
Yay to delist.
Okay, JR.
Yay.
Ivory.
Yay.
Leah.
Yay.
Roberta.
Nay.
Melinda.
Yay.
Okay, and I say nay. So we now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 have voted to delist. So do I have that right? We got Megan, Justin, JR, Ivory, Leah, and Melinda said yes to delist. Is that all correct? Did I, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? And then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 no's. So this is gonna, this recommendation to delist is gonna go forward to City Council. So now, as Roberta said, this is, you know, we have to write up something around this. So just to make a clarification, is that something that the policy committee wants to take on, or what are your thoughts on that?
As one of the chairs of the policy committee, I have no interest in writing this letter, but I would suggest that Justin and others who are supportive of it write a draft of the letter.
So I would suggest that perhaps, I mean, Megan's on the policy committee. I'm on the policy committee, and anyone who, I think it should be maybe, I was going to ask Megan perhaps as the policy committee rep to maybe work with Justin and do an initial draft. And I'm happy to participate in helping to craft some of the reasons that folks voted no, and then we can bring the whole thing together to the group for approval. The commission should see this before it goes forward to City Council, I think.
Does that sounds reasonable. So can we do that by email? What are your thoughts, Brian, or is that?
Yeah, I think if I think we can identify someone to maybe volunteer and take the lead on it. They can draft that, and then if there's some discussion on what's to be had, that can take place at the policy committee since that's a public meeting. But the process would be to bring that draft to the next month's UFC meeting to review and vote on it.
Okay, great. Well, we're out of time. Thanks so much for staying 6 minutes over. Good discussion, and we'll look forward to getting that draft circulating. Thank you all.
Sorry, just real quickly, do we have someone who's volunteering to draft that?
I'll volunteer.
Okay, Justin, well, great, thank you.
I'm happy to help, Justin. I can't lead it, but I can help.
Yeah, I'll email.
Yes, I also heard, I hear Roberta's request, so maybe I can, as a policy committee individual, I'm happy to work with anyone. Maybe we can confirm in whatever way is appropriate via public meeting law requirements, Brian, to know who wants to be involved in that letter. But Justin, if you want to lead and I can be a policy committee representative, that also ensures the policy committee is weighing in on this.
And I'd like to help participate to do the quote unquote dissenting view as well. And I'm happy to work with all of you. I think if we don't have a quorum, we can coordinate by email. Is that correct, Brian? If it's, say, 4 of us, for example?
Believe
Because
it's discouraged to be having sort of substantive conversations outside of the public meetings, as the public has a right to access to the deliberations of the UFC. So I would just encourage you to limit that and have most of those taking place at the UFC meeting. Rob, please feel free to correct or amend that if I have it wrong.
No, that's good advice, Brian. You should, yeah.
Could we maybe just quick motive clarification? The policy committee is scheduled for 5:45 this coming Monday, I believe the 24th. So I don't know if that works for you, Justin, and or you, Leah, or anyone else on this commission that wants to come to that meeting, but that might be an ideal way because we already have public meeting requirements around that to post it. So that might be a recommendation that threads a needle here.
I think I could make that work. 5:45, you said on Monday.
Yeah, I
Good.
can make that work.
All right, well, thanks, guys, for all your contributions. Take care. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks everyone.